He hired ex-wife as waitress at his wedding. She walked in like a queen. Hello, everyone. Before we begin today's video, I need your help. We've noticed that the channel is losing traction, and subscribing is one of the best ways you can help us. It's quick, free, and allows us to continue bringing you great content. Your support means everything. Let's keep this channel growing collectively. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to the story. The ballroom glittered with chandeliers, gold cutlery, and a silence that cracked the moment one voice split the air. Go serve the table, waiter. It wasn't whispered. It was loud, sharp, deliberate, a command that hit like broken glass scattering across marble. Heads turned instantly. Every guest pivoted toward the woman standing in the aisle. She was tall, statuesque, draped in a gown that shimmered with subtle gold. Yet in her hands, balanced steady, was a silver tray with empty champagne flutes. To them, that was proof enough. A servant dressed too well for her station. The bride gasped. The groom smirked. A ripple of laughter rolled through one corner of the room like a cruel wave. But her eyes, calm, steady, unblinking, never wavered. She didn't flinch. She didn't defend. She just stood anchored in that storm, holding her ground the way a mountain holds against lightning. From the back of the room, someone muttered, "That's his ex-wife. He hired her to pour drinks." The words spread quickly, whispered from table to table, turning curiosity into scandal. Phones tilted upward. A junior server in a black vest quietly pressed record, the red light glowing like a witness too timid to speak but brave enough to capture the truth. The bride's voice sliced next. Poor thing, she couldn't move on. Imagine ending up back here, as staff. Guests chuckled, eyes darting between the glowing chandelier and the woman in gold, waiting for her to shrink. But she didn't. Instead, she adjusted the tray slightly, as if its weight meant nothing, and let the silence return. Her poise was unsettling, the kind that made even laughter feel nervous, unfinished. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change, and we're glad you're here. Now, back to her. Her name was Danielle Brooks. Once, she had walked into rooms like this wearing gowns worth more than the chandeliers overhead. Once, she had been the woman standing at the altar. Tonight, she stood accused of being less than the guests she had once hosted. But Danielle wasn't here to defend her past. She wasn't here to argue over status. She was here to let them talk, let them reveal themselves until the moment she chose to reveal her own truth. In that first 5 minutes of humiliation, no one in that glittering room realized what kind of storm they had just invited to dinner. The music had faded, but the sting of that insult lingered in the air like smoke no chandelier could clear. Danielle Brooks stood motionless in the center aisle, framed by gold-trimmed chairs and the stares of 200 guests who thought they knew exactly who she was. To them, she was just an ex-wife, a mistake the groom had outgrown, a shadow now reduced to carrying glasses. But what they didn't know was that Danielle had chosen to arrive this way. No entourage, no headlines announcing her return, just a quiet entry, tray in hand, allowing them to write their own judgments. And they did eagerly. She remembered other nights, years earlier, when the same room bowed to her presence. She remembered being 26, entering a gala on the arm of the very man now standing in a tux beside his new bride. Back then, the cameras had flashed for her. Back then, no one told her to serve tables. That memory didn't wound her now. It only sharpened her stillness. The groom, Nathaniel Pierce, glanced toward her with a look that wasn't surprise, it was satisfaction, as if seeing her in that role confirmed every narrative he had rehearsed since their divorce. He whispered something into the bride's ear, and she laughed brittle, forced, meant for the audience. From the back row, a middle-aged woman whispered, "She doesn't even look ashamed." Her companion replied, "She should be." Imagine falling this far. But Danielle wasn't falling. She was observing. Her gown, though understated compared to the bride's, was tailored with precision, not flashy, not careless, deliberate. Her jewelry was minimal, a single cuff that caught light with every small movement, a symbol, not an ornament. Anyone looking closely enough would see the difference. But they weren't looking closely. They were too busy sneering. A catering manager, flushed from rushing between tables, strode up beside her. "Ma'am, keep moving. Guests are waiting." His tone was clipped, rehearsed, the kind used for staff, never for equals. The room exhaled, relieved that someone had reasserted hierarchy. Danielle didn't argue. She shifted her weight slightly, set the tray on a nearby table, and folded her hands in front of her. Calm, composed, waiting. The young server, still recording in the corner, frowned. Something about her silence unsettled him. She wasn't flustered. She wasn't scrambling to prove herself. It was the kind of silence that carried weight, like a courtroom waiting for the verdict. Nathaniel lifted his champagne glass, as though sealing the scene. "To moving on," he declared loudly, staring directly at Danielle. Guests laughed, clinked glasses, and turned away, believing the show was over. But Danielle knew the night hadn't even started. She had walked into this wedding with purpose. Every insult, every whisper, every sideways glance, they weren't obstacles. They were evidence. And when the moment came, she wouldn't need to shout for justice. She would deliver it the way storms break glass, sudden, absolute, undeniable. The toast had barely settled when the ballroom shifted again. Voices low at first, then sharper, cutting through the string quartet still trying to play. "Why is she still standing there?" someone muttered from table 7. "She's supposed to be serving." A laugh followed, brittle and eager to sting. The catering manager spotted her stillness and stormed across the polished floor. His shoes tapped like a gavel on marble. "Miss, I said keep moving. These glasses aren't going to refill themselves." His voice carried enough to draw stares from half the room. Danielle didn't flinch. She simply raised one eyebrow, the kind of gesture that unsettled him more than defiance. The bride leaned closer to Nathaniel. "She's embarrassing herself. Make her stop." Her smile stayed wide, teeth polished for the cameras, but her voice trembled just enough to betray unease. Nathaniel smirked, lifted his glass again, and nodded toward Danielle. "You heard the lady. Back to work." A murmur rippled across the room. Some guests grinned, others exchanged glances, unsure whether this cruelty was entertainment or humiliation. The young server, still filming, whispered into his phone, "This doesn't feel right." His camera shook slightly, the red light steady as judgment. From the corner, an older guest, a man in a gray suit with silver hair, cleared his throat. "Let her be. It's their wedding, not a spectacle." But his words were drowned beneath the bride's laughter. "Spectacle is exactly what she wants," the bride said loudly. "Ex-wife can't stand watching him happy, so she pretends she belongs here. Pathetic." The room chuckled. The catering manager folded his arms, emboldened by her tone. "You're lucky we even let you step inside. Most places don't tolerate frauds." Danielle's silence stretched. She adjusted her cuff bracelet, its metallic sheen catching the chandelier light like a quiet blade. Inside her chest, her heart didn't race. It slowed. Each insult was a beat, steady, measured. She remembered being 23, denied entry into a hotel lounge despite holding the master key. Same tone, same laughter. She'd built an empire on moments like these. "Ma'am," the catering manager snapped again, sharper now. "Pick up that tray or I'll have you escorted out." Guests gasped softly. The threat shifted the air. Danielle finally moved. She bent, lifted the tray once more, not with haste, not with apology, but with precision. She held it at her side, chin lifted. Her voice, calm but sharp enough to cut through the room, broke the tension. "Careful. You might mistake who's serving whom." The words landed like a tremor. Small, subtle, but undeniable. A few guests blinked, uncertain whether they'd heard a warning or a promise. Nathaniel laughed too quickly, as if trying to smother the unease. "Ignore her," he told the crowd. "She's nothing but the help." But his laugh didn't erase the moment. If anything, it deepened the crack already forming in the night's perfection. And Danielle knew. The higher their mockery climbed, the further they were about to fall. Danielle didn't argue. Not yet. Her tray balanced at her side, her chin tilted just enough to hold dignity in a room intent on stripping it away. Silence spread, uncomfortable, unnatural in a ballroom designed for laughter and clinking crystal. That silence was her choice, and it unnerved them more than outrage ever could. The catering manager shifted on his feet, expecting protest. He had played this game before. Bark an order, absorb the defense, escalate to control. But there was no defense, only stillness. The kind that made his authority feel smaller with every second. A guest near the stage leaned forward. "Why doesn't she say something?" he whispered to his wife. "She's ashamed," the wife replied, though her tone betrayed doubt. But Danielle wasn't ashamed. She was listening, measuring. Every insult was another weight on the scale she was quietly tipping. The bride broke the silence with a sharp laugh, brittle as glass. See? She won't even deny it. That's what failure looks like. She reached across the table, lacing her fingers through Nathaniel's, a performance as calculated as her diamond tiara. Nathaniel smirked, but for the briefest moment his eyes flicked toward Danielle with something else recognition. He had seen that calm before, in boardrooms, in negotiations, in moments when silence was a weapon sharper than any word. The memory unsettled him, though he buried it quickly beneath another toast. "To love that lasts," he said, raising his glass. His voice rang hollow. The junior server, filming from the corner, tightened his grip on the phone. The woman in gold didn't look like staff, didn't look defeated. She looked patient. Danielle's breathing slowed. In her mind, echoes surfaced. A hotel lobby years earlier, a man at the desk telling her, "This place isn't for you." She had walked out that night without protest, but built a hotel chain to make sure no one could say those words to her again. Tonight was no different. Tonight was fuel. A group of guests laughed louder, desperate to fill the tension her silence created. One man clapped mockingly. "Well, aren't you going to pour us a drink?" Her eyes slid toward him, steady, unblinking. That look was enough to quiet his grin. He shifted in his chair, suddenly uncertain, hiding behind his champagne glass. The catering manager cleared his throat, louder this time. "Ma'am, this is your last warning." His words cracked, not from authority but from nerves. Danielle finally placed the tray back down, gently, like setting evidence on a courtroom table. She folded her hands once more, her voice low, even, threaded with steel. Last warnings usually end worse for the one giving them. A murmur swept the room. Not loud, but sharp enough to cut through the bride's forced laughter. Danielle's calm had become the loudest voice in the hall. The ballroom no longer felt like a celebration. It felt like a stage, and everyone inside knew they were watching a scene that wasn't scripted. The young server in the black vest still had his phone raised, the red recording light glowing like a warning flare. He glanced nervously toward the catering manager, then back at Danielle. "This isn't right," he whispered, though his voice barely carried past the linen-draped table. Two guests at the far end leaned closer to each other. "She doesn't even look like staff," one murmured. "Look at the way she stands." Another guest, a woman in a crimson dress, tilted her head. "That gown, no waitress shows up wearing couture." Their whispers multiplied, tiny sparks running across the room. A handful of people began quietly pulling out their phones, pretending to check messages but angling their cameras instead. The bride noticed, and her smile faltered. She tightened her grip on Nathaniel's arm. "They're recording," she hissed. Nathaniel forced a laugh, louder than necessary. "Let them. Everyone deserves to see what moving on looks like." He gestured toward Danielle, as though her presence were part of the entertainment. But the cracks in his confidence were starting to show. At the nearest table, an elderly man set down his glass with a firm clink. "Why humiliate her like this?" His voice was soft, but the silence around him carried it further than he intended. Heads turned. The catering manager bristled. "Sir, this is none of your concern." But it was. The moment had stopped being private, the second phones were raised, the second witnesses chose not to look away. Danielle's eyes swept the room, steady, deliberate. She didn't speak, but her silence seemed to embolden others. A young woman in a silver gown finally stood, her voice trembling but clear. "She's not staff. I saw her name on the guest list." Gasps rippled. The bride shot her a glare sharp enough to cut glass. "Sit down. You don't know what you're talking about." But the woman didn't sit. She lifted her phone higher instead. "I know what I saw." The junior server lowered his camera for a moment, conflicted. Danielle turned her gaze toward him, not pleading, just steady as if reminding him that truth didn't need to be hidden. His hand shook once, then he lifted the phone again. The crowd's whispers grew louder. "What's happening? Why is she being treated like this? Isn't she?" The questions didn't have answers yet, but the unease was undeniable. Danielle remained still, calm, her presence pulling the tension tighter with each second. She had done nothing, said almost nothing, and yet the room was shifting around her. For the first time all night, the power wasn't in the insults or the orders. It was in the witnesses. And Danielle knew, once witnesses awaken, the truth can't be buried again. The murmurs had grown too loud to ignore. Guests shifting, phones raised, a ripple of doubt spreading across the gilded hall. The bride's smile cracked under the weight of it. Nathaniel's jaw tightened, and the catering manager, red-faced, sweating, decided to reclaim control. He stepped forward, voice booming above the whispers. "Enough! You don't belong here. Pick up that tray or get out of this ballroom before I have security drag you out." Gasps scattered like broken glass across the room. Some guests looked away, others leaned closer, hungry for spectacle. Danielle didn't move. Her silence pulled the tension tighter, until one of Nathaniel's associates, a man in a navy suit with a gold pocket square, rose from his chair. His voice carried the polished arrogance of someone used to being obeyed. "This wedding is for family and dignified guests, not desperate ex-wives trying to play dress-up. She's ruining the night. Remove her." The bride exhaled, almost relieved someone else had said it aloud. "Yes," she chimed in, louder now. "Escort her out. She doesn't deserve to stand in this room." The junior server's phone shook in his hand. His whisper cracked through the silence on his recording. "They're actually trying to throw her out." Danielle's eyes shifted slowly toward the man in the navy suit. Not sharp, not angry, just steady, the way a mountain looks at a storm cloud. He faltered, his next words catching in his throat. The catering manager pressed forward, emboldened by the bride's approval. "This is your last chance. Leave now before we call the police. Trespassing, impersonation, choose your excuse." The crowd leaned in, the word police snapping their attention like a whip. Phones lifted higher. No one wanted to miss what was about to unfold. Danielle finally spoke, her voice low but carrying effortlessly across the room. "Careful. When you choose the wrong accusation, you choose the end of your own job." The manager blinked, stunned. The arrogance in his stance faltered, just for a second, before he barked again. "You think threats work here? You're nothing. He left you. Move on." The bride laughed, sharp and brittle. "Exactly. She clings to scraps. This is pathetic." Danielle placed the tray back on the table, hands folding neatly in front of her. Her calm was louder than their shouting. Around the room, a few guests began to frown. One whispered, "This doesn't feel right." Another muttered, "Why is she so calm if she doesn't belong?" The witnesses weren't just watching anymore, they were questioning. And Danielle knew. The more her accusers pushed, the clearer their cruelty became. The stage was setting itself, and all she had to do was wait. The ballroom's golden glow no longer felt warm. It felt like a spotlight, harsh and merciless, trained on Danielle alone. Every eye followed her. Every phone tilted higher. The catering manager's patience snapped. He strode across the marble floor, snatched the tray from Danielle's hands, and slammed it onto the nearest table. Glasses rattled. One tipped and shattered against the edge. "Out!" he barked, pointing toward the exit. "You don't belong here." A collective gasp rippled through the hall. The sound of glass breaking had punctured the evening like a gunshot. The bride rose now, her gown spilling like a river of silk as she pointed across the room. "She's nothing but a stain on this wedding. Security, get her out." Her voice cracked at the edges, desperation masquerading as command. Nathaniel stood too, his smirk colder this time. "We gave you a chance to leave quietly. Don't make this worse for yourself." At table 9, a guest muttered, "Worse. She hasn't done anything," but his voice drowned under the roar of authority. One of Nathaniel's associates, the man in the navy suit, pulled out his phone and pretended to dial. "I'm calling law enforcement right now. Impersonation, disruption, harassment, she's finished." Danielle didn't move. Her breathing was even, her gaze unshaken. But inside, she marked the moment. This was it, the line they had chosen to cross. The catering manager stepped closer, so close his shadow swallowed the hem of her gown. He leaned in, voice low but loud enough for nearby phones to catch. "You're a fraud. You're desperate. Women like you don't get second chances. Leave before you're dragged out like trash." The words dripped venom. They hung in the air, heavier than the chandeliers overhead. The junior server gasped softly behind his camera. His whisper trembled. "He just called her trash." The bride, drunk on the spectacle, added her final cut. She laughed sharp, cruel, echoing. "Look at her, dressed like royalty, carrying trays like staff. That's not class, that's comedy." The laughter that followed wasn't unanimous. Some guests joined in nervously, others shifted uncomfortably. One woman folded her arms, her frown deepening. Danielle's silence remained, unbroken, but her stillness no longer looked like submission, it looked like preparation. The room didn't see it yet, but she knew. This was the moment just before the storm breaks. The ballroom vibrated with tension, every insult still echoing like shards of glass left on the floor. Danielle's stillness had carried her this far, But now the time for silence was over. She reached into the folds of her gown, not hurried, not defensive, but deliberate, and drew out a sleek black phone. The glow of its screen lit her face as she tapped a single contact. The room hushed. Guests leaned in, phones raised higher. Even the bride froze mid-laugh. Danielle lifted the phone to her ear, her voice calm, steady, precise. "Activate protocol." On the other end, a crisp female voice responded instantly. "Confirmed. Logging incident. Time-stamping every insult. Corporate compliance is monitoring live." The catering manager's smirk faltered. "What the hell are you?" Danielle raised a single finger, silencing him without raising her voice. She didn't look at him. She didn't need to. The junior server's camera shook. He whispered into the mic, "She just said corporate's monitoring. What's happening?" Nathaniel chuckled nervously, trying to reassert control. "Oh, please. A phone call won't save you. You're grasping at straws." But Danielle's eyes never left his. She spoke again, softly, but the microphone in her phone carried it across the room. "Proceed with escalation. Full audit. Cross-reference tonight's contract with ownership files." The bride's smile collapsed. "Ownership files?" she whispered, too low for most to hear, but the nearest phones caught it. Danielle lowered the phone slightly, her voice measured, clear enough for every guest to understand. "You thought I came here to serve. I came here to watch you serve yourselves into ruin." The room fell utterly still. Even the music from the quartet had stopped. The catering manager swallowed hard, sweat beading at his temple. "Stop playing games, you're bluffing." But already, the doors at the far end opened. 2 staff members from the hotel stepped in, not with urgency but with authority, carrying tablets glowing with live feeds of data. Their badges bore the hotel's crest, the same hotel where this wedding was being hosted. One leaned toward the catering manager, whispering something that drained the color from his face. His eyes darted back to Danielle, wide, shaken. She hadn't moved an inch. The witnesses knew now. This wasn't desperation. This was strategy. Danielle's calm had shifted into something else entirely: command. The ballroom waited. No music, no laughter, just the pulse of unease thickening in the air. Danielle lowered her phone, her fingers steady, her posture taller than the chandeliers above. She let the silence linger another beat, because silence now belonged to her. Then, with a voice calm enough to shake the walls, she spoke. "You called me staff. You called me a fraud. But let me be perfectly clear. This hotel, this ballroom, this very wedding venue belongs to me." The words detonated. Gasps cracked across the room like thunder. A dozen phones lifted higher, recording from every angle. The young server's whisper trembled into his mic. "She owns the place. Oh my God." The bride staggered back, clutching Nathaniel's arm. "She's lying," she hissed, her voice cracking. "Tell them she's lying." Nathaniel's smirk dissolved. His lips parted, but no words came out. He glanced at the catering manager, desperate for backup. But the manager stood frozen, eyes darting toward the staff who had entered with glowing tablets. One of them stepped forward, reading aloud from the screen. "Confirmed. Property registration. Danielle Brooks. Primary shareholder. Full executive authority." A collective gasp swept the room. Phones buzzed as notifications exploded on live streams already spreading beyond the ballroom. Danielle's eyes swept the crowd. Calm, sharp, relentless. "You thought I came back to beg for relevance, to scrape at the edges of your celebration, but I don't need an invitation to enter my own property." The bride's face drained pale. This can't be happening." Nathaniel's fists clenched, his voice trembling with fury he couldn't mask. "You don't have the right to—" Danielle cut him off, her tone precise as a blade. "I don't need your permission. You're celebrating inside my walls, drinking from my glasses, toasting under my chandeliers. And every insult you've thrown tonight has been logged, recorded, preserved, under my authority." Gasps turned to murmurs. Murmurs turned to outrage. A woman in the back whispered, "They humiliated her in her own hotel." Another muttered, "This is insane." The catering manager stammered, I didn't know. They said." Danielle turned her gaze on him, steady as stone. "You didn't care to know. You saw what you wanted. And now, everyone else sees you." The silence that followed wasn't submission, it was reckoning. Danielle had revealed her truth, and the entire room had shifted. No longer victim, no longer servant. She was power unveiled, and there was no going back. The moment Danielle's words landed, the ballroom fractured. The chandeliers still glowed, but the glitter felt cold now, spotlights exposing guilt instead of glamour. The bride's tiara tilted slightly as she stumbled back into her chair. Her painted smile dissolved into a trembling line. This isn't real," she whispered, but her voice carried no conviction. Her hands clutched at the tablecloth as if it could anchor her. Nathaniel's jaw worked furiously, but no words formed. His eyes darted around the room, searching for allies, for someone to laugh it off, to dismiss her claim. But there were none. Even his closest friends had lowered their champagne glasses, staring at him with unease, waiting for him to explain how he had let the ex-wife he mocked own the very hall he had chosen for his new vows. The catering manager was crumbling faster, his posture wilted, his voice a stammer. I didn't know. I was just following orders. I thought—" His excuses tangled and died in his throat. The staff who had entered with tablets stood stone-faced beside him, their presence a silent verdict. The guests were no longer amused, phones angled high, recording every twitch of fear. One woman whispered, "They humiliated her in her own hotel." Another shook her head, whispering, "You can't recover from that." The young server's recording captured everything: the bride's pale face, Nathaniel's clenched fists, the manager's collapse. His commentary broke through softly. The whole room turned on them. "This is history right here." The bride finally snapped, her voice shrill, cracking under pressure. "Why didn't you tell me she owned this place?" She jabbed a finger into Nathaniel's chest, her composure gone. "You dragged me into a circus," Nathaniel hissed back. "I didn't know she must have bought it after—" But the words were useless, drowned in the murmurs rising like a tide. From the corner, a guest in a crimson gown spoke louder than she meant to. "You treated her like dirt, and she built the ground you're standing on." The room exhaled in unison, a wave of realization washing over the glittering hall. Every insult they had witnessed was now evidence of arrogance, ignorance, cruelty. Danielle stood perfectly still at the center, unbothered by the chaos unraveling around her. To her, this was no longer confrontation, it was exposure, and every second of their panic was proof of her quiet victory. The power had shifted, and the collapse had begun. The ballroom trembled with silence, the kind that follows a storm's first strike. Danielle let it hang a moment longer before she lifted her phone again. "Compliance," she said, voice smooth as steel. "Proceed." The staff with tablets moved instantly. A ripple of digital confirmation flashed across their screens. One leaned forward, speaking loud enough for every phone camera to capture. "Effective immediately terminate catering contract, revoke vendor access, and freeze staff credentials tied to tonight's event." The catering manager's jaw dropped. His badge beeped red, the small LED blinking like a final verdict. He fumbled at it, panic rising. "Wait, please, I didn't know." Danielle's eyes met his, unflinching. "You didn't care to know. That was your mistake." Gasps filled the hall. The young server's camera caught the exact moment the manager's authority drained from him, his posture collapsing like scaffolding kicked loose. The bride shot up from her chair, her voice frantic. "You can't just shut down my wedding." Danielle tilted her head, calm, deliberate. "This isn't your wedding anymore. It's my venue, my staff, my rules, and I won't host cruelty under my roof." Nathaniel lunged a step forward, his fury boiling. "You're ruining everything!" Her voice cut sharper than his shout. "No, Nathaniel. You ruined yourself the moment you tried to humiliate me in my own house." The guests erupted not in laughter this time, but in murmurs of awe, some even clapping quietly, unable to contain the satisfaction of justice unfolding live. The crimson-dressed guest raised her phone higher, her voice steady now. "This is going viral." The bride's tiara glimmered under the chandeliers as she shook her head in disbelief, tears threatening her mascara. "This can't be happening." But it was, and Danielle wasn't finished. She turned back to the staff. "Lock their names into the system. Permanent ban. No appeal." The finality in her tone was a gavel strike. Nathaniel froze, realizing his empire of arrogance had no ground left to stand on. The catering manager buried his face in his hands. The bride crumbled into her chair, sobbing quietly as guests whispered. Recorded. Documented. Danielle's justice wasn't loud. It was precise, irreversible, public, and it had landed. The chandeliers still glowed, but no one looked at them anymore. Every gaze in the ballroom was fixed on Danielle Brooks, the woman they had called a servant, a fraud, a ghost of the past. Now she stood unshaken, while those who mocked her crumbled in plain sight. The bride sat collapsed in her chair, mascara streaking down her cheeks. Nathaniel's fists had loosened into trembling hands, powerless in the venue he thought he controlled. The catering manager no longer barked orders. He shrank into the corner, badge blinking red like a scarlet letter. Phones hovered high, capturing every second. The story had already leapt beyond these walls. By morning, millions would see it. Danielle didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She let her words land with the weight of truth. You tried to erase me, to turn me into a spectacle for your amusement. But dignity doesn't disappear because you laugh at it, and power doesn't vanish because you pretend not to see it. Her gaze swept the hall, steady, commanding. Power doesn't scream, it stands. The line cut through the air like a blade. Guests froze, their silence transformed into reverence. From the corner, the young server lowered his phone just long enough to whisper, "That's real power. Quiet, untouchable." Then he lifted it again, determined to keep filming history. Danielle turned slightly, her gown catching the light in a quiet shimmer. "This night will not be remembered as your celebration," she said, her eyes locking briefly on Nathaniel and the bride. "It will be remembered as the moment cruelty collapsed under its own arrogance." No one argued. No one laughed. The crowd knew better now. She took a single step forward, each movement slow, deliberate, carrying the weight of finality. "I don't need to prove myself with shouting. My proof is the ground you're standing on. My proof is every insult recorded tonight. And my proof," her voice dropped, calm but cutting, "is that I'm still here, stronger than when you tried to break me." The guests exhaled as one. Some clapped softly, others bowed their heads in respect. The tide had turned completely. Danielle offered no further words. She didn't linger for applause or validation. She simply turned, walking through the ballroom with the steady grace of someone who owned not just the building, but the silence itself. Behind her, the hall buzzed with whispers, and the quiet hum of justice finally served. Danielle Brooks had walked into this wedding accused of being nothing. She walked out having reminded everyone she was everything they had underestimated.